listening to the 14th source for all geeky and nerdy news and discussion, which means that you're listening to a podcast.
For all intents and purposes.
I am D. Bethel.
And I'm Andrew Asplund.
And we are your two overeducated, codependent nerd hosts, bringing you the things that we like to talk about, but filtered through inquisitive and critical lenses. In the episode for Friday, May 12th, 2023.
All right, we're in the midst of May.
The midst of May. Linman May. And,
The Ides of May.
The Ides of Linman May. I talked about before how, like, I've been seeing movies, because movies are coming out, and even more movies are coming out. We got Guardians of the Galaxy that came out, I guess, last week? I haven't seen it. Too many people. But we also have, I was just looking it up before the show, that Little Mermaid I guess this is actually a live action adaptation, unlike The Lion King, which was just computer animation, but they called it the live action version. It's coming out at the end of May, which I'm not particularly looking forward to. I'm just like, that's happening. It's here, you know?
Right.
And
yeah, it's a good point. Like, it's not something I'm not like, ooh, let's go see it, but okay, it's happening. Yeah.
Right. The only thing I know about that is that I heard some news come out about how they brought in Lin-Manuel Miranda to rewrite some lyrics to, I forget which song, Kiss the Girl, I think?
Kiss the Girl, yeah, I believe Kiss the Girl.
Because apparently, with the progress of time, some lyrics become problematic. And they're like, hey, bud, you make popular musicals, fix this.
Which is, I mean, it's weird because, you know, you're like, how bad can it be? And I think, actually, I went and looked up. And you're like, okay, this is actually about non-consensual, behavior.
Yeah, and
probably something we don't really need. Yeah.
Right. It's interesting, though, because Disney Plus released a movie that I actually want to see because I think it's technically a live-action remake that only released to streaming and wasn't really marketed as being like, this is our next step in the live-action adaptations of all the beloved animated films. But they released to Disney Plus a movie called Peter Pan and Wendy. That I remember watching the trailer for it. I'm like, this looks actually interesting. It looks like they're doing a spin on it that actually makes it distinct from the animated movie. Yeah. Then something that actually gives it a purpose. And come to find out when I was doing research, I'm like, no, this is their live action adaptation of their Peter Pan movie. I'm like, okay. One, why didn't they release it to theaters? Maybe they didn't have enough confidence in it. Or two, maybe they think they were worried they would piss off people because it deviated too much.
Right.
From the original, whereas people like perhaps you and I are like, no, make it distinct, make it interesting. And I meant to actually watch it last week. We didn't get around to it. It was a busy weekend. Right. But I am going to watch that because it actually seems interesting. More than just changing the lyrics to make it, less, non-consensual.
Yes. With a dash less sexual assault.
Right. But speaking of new and exciting things, this week we are going to share with you, our dear listeners, our respective weeks in geek. So, Andrew, if you don't mind going, I think it's a video game week for the both of us.
It is. Right? It is.
So what video game has been occupying your week in geek this week?
So I'm playing a game that not only just came out in the last 2 weeks, I actually kickstarted it. So this is like, I'm so cutting edge.
Oh, wow. Seriously. You actually supported the Kickstarter?
I did, yeah.
Oh, wow, look at you.
So back about 2 years ago, so early 2021, this group called Soda Den Games, I believe.
Okay.
Let's just say it's Soda Den. I don't know, Soda Brothers, Soda Den. Anyway, it's a small indie, like, it actually says it's two brothers, is what it says on their website. But, yeah, Soda Den Games. They kickstarted basically they're an indie video game that they wanted to make, and let's not hide anything. The game is called Roots of Pacha. It is a single player or multiplayer farming simulator set in a Neolithic setting. Right? It's Stardew Valley, but you a caveman or cave woman.
Oh, that changes everything.
And what's interesting is, and I don't think they ever hid that, right? They're like, yeah, we want to make our own spin on this kind of game, but approaching it now years after Stardew Valley came out, and again, Stardew Valley wasn't original either, right? It was just, hey, I'm making Harvest Moon, but more of what I wanted,
right? With more kissing,
and so
I might be wrong.
well, there's a fair amount of kissing if you want Stardew Valley.
And gift giving. That's more. Yeah.
But so it's interesting because this is it's another game, that thing. And of course, I've talked about Stardew Valley at least a few times. I've played it a bunch. It's one of these games that hits the itch of, apparently Andrew just likes to build engines, like, oh, look at my farm engine, right? And then watch them make fake money. And so I've been playing that Cutting Edge. Again, I started it the day it was released on Steam, again, because I'd kickstarted it. And I gotta say, I'm just gonna start by saying it's exactly what you think. If you're the kind of person that played Stardew Valley and said, like, yeah, I like this game, I'd like to play a different version of this game, this is it. This is the game for you, right? It takes some of the theme of this Neolithic setting. Like I said, the idea is that you are a tribe, the Pachans, who basically you migrate due to whatever reasons to a new place, and you stop because you find this big tree, the Pacha tree, and that's where you decide to build your community. And then it's just, all right, here you go. You start living in your adoptive parents' house, and then you just go, do what you want, figure stuff out. And of course, you quickly realize, like, oh, there's some space that you can clear that's maybe it's good for farming. And then you start to discover seeds that you then, let's plant these. One thing I will say is it definitely takes some different turns from a game like Stardew Valley. So for those who don't know, Stardew Valley is, you inherit this farm from your grandfather, and you move there, and so you're clearing ground. Excuse me, you're clearing ground, you're planting seeds, you're growing crops. You get the seeds from the seed store, then you sell the crops, you make money to buy more seeds and to buy more stuff.
Right.
And then you go into the cave to explore, you learn how to build things. Whereas Roots of Pacha is actually a little bit more, there's no store because you're a Neolithic society. It's instead of selling things, you're contributing them to the community, which gives you community points, which you then can spend with members of your community, like money. But but actually, like, it has a different kind of feel, right? It's not money, and actually there are other tribes of Neolithic people that you can trade with, and you can't trade them your community points. You have to actually trade them goods, because guess what? They're not part of your community. But there's some notable differences. You find the seeds that you want to harvest, and then eventually you when you start, you have no seeds. There's nothing. You're just like, all right, you started, and then
just a Pacha tree.
In your starting village, there are some wild, I forget what it is. I think they're tomato plants. So you're like, you can go grab seeds from there and then replant them. And eventually you find more seeds around the map in the different locations, which lets you grow more stuff. You gain experience growing things, so until you eventually domesticate them, which then kind of changes their quality, essentially. But yeah, what I like about it is it's a very, like, if you know what you're expecting with Stardew Valley, you sit down to this and like, it's very similar, but there are differences that are notable, but they're also fun. Like, they're different ways to approach this kind of game. Like the idea that, you have to find the seeds, not just go to the store and buy them. And then you eventually, one thing I really do like is the way they handle expanding what you can do. Is what they call it ideas, where you'll wake up in your smoke signals, which is like your not your quest log, but essentially a quest log. You'll say like, hey, this guy over here has an idea, go talk to him about it. And he'll be like, hey man, I had this idea about doing something. If you give me these supplies, I'll work on it. And that's how you start to develop the kind of gear that in Stardew you mostly get through leveling up your skills or by talking to people.
Right.
So like it'll be like, for example, there's one guy who's kind of an eccentric inventor, and once you get the community grown enough, then he'll say like, hey, I was watching how the water like the river waters the ground. And I thought like, hey, what if we did something? And he helps develop like agriculture ditches, right? Like, oh, cool. So you can, do that. Another guy like, oh, I was, messing around with food and I put it into this barrel for a while and some really nice juice came out and you get a brewing station, right? Whatever.
Right. Got a headache all the time, but hey.
So, but I like the way they do it because it has a certain kind of organicness to it where, granted that these things happen, they trigger based on certain events, but then it's like, oh, well, why don't you try doing this? And so it creates a way to just do the same thing that a game like Stardew Valley does, but a new and creative way that really fits with that theme of you're a Neolithic person. The other thing I really like is, although I don't play with friends, I don't do that. It was built from the ground up to be multiplayer. So unlike Stardew Valley where they had to add the multiplayer later. So I like the idea that if you wanted to, you could play with your friends and like.
What does a multiplayer for a farming simulator look like?
Exactly what you think, which is 4 people playing a farming simulator at the same time on the same map.
Okay.
Yeah. It is just like, so it's that you all have one shared map, but suddenly there's 4 of you and you all have different houses.
And then it becomes Civ and you just got to conquer the other? No?
No. You work together, right? So I tried very briefly multiplayer Stardew Valley. I was like, oh, no, this is not for me. But at least they do that and they have certain game features that you can tell like, oh, wow, okay, I get how this would be more interesting with multiplayer if that's what you wanted to do, but you don't have to.
Didn't you create a server it was like a crafting game?
That would be Starbound, yes.
Starbound, okay, yeah. But that's different. That's a different type of game.
That was different because that was one where, it was different and it worked a little bit better than I think Stardew Valley or Roots of Pacha. But what I like is it's been a really like it is very. I mean, there are a lot of places where you say like, oh, well, how do they do that? Like, oh, there are parallels to a lot of the Stardew Valley stuff. Oh, this is how they do. Instead of rebuilding the community center, you're kind of fulfilling these tribe. Prophecies that then kind of have a story. So for those that know, the community center in Stardew Valley was basically a bunch of quests you could do, and as you finished them, you got rewards, and then when you finished all of them, it kind of unlocked new stuff. Same idea here, but it's the village prophecies. Like do this thing, and then you get to, and it kind of unlocks more narrative and more stuff to work with. I realize I have a weird thing for games like this. Like it's apparently one of my obsessions, and it's nice to because while I do replay Stardew Valley every couple of years, I'll start it up again, especially because they keep adding content. I like that here's a different game to play. That like this is a different one that gives me similar experiences, but in new and different ways. And there's more stuff for me to discover, right? Because part of the fun is learning, how do I do these things? Like, what is the best way to do these crops or to do these things or to raise, what kind of animals should I raise? What's the best choices?
Right.
So
now, is there an end game?
No.
Or it's about the engine, not the destination?
Well, so I don't know about Roots of Pacha. There is like once you complete all the prophecies, similar to the community center, that invokes like a story. Like I actually just got to this point in my own play where it's like, oh, you finished all the prophecies. Oh, something new is happening. But okay. I don't know where. I'm assuming eventually that leads to an end. Stardew Valley had multiple kind of end points where obviously there was finishing the community center and later the movie theater, but then also you would get at the end of like your first or second year, the ghost of your grandfather would come back and judge you. Which sounds really weird when you say it that way. So there was the idea, you had to have a good enough farm so grandfather would be like, yeah, you're cool. Good job, son. And then later
at that point you've developed your character enough to respond, I don't need your approval, old man.
And then I think eventually they added like a final get all the like, once you do enough of the stuff, then there's like a final, end game. Like, look, you got to the end. You can keep playing, but really you're at the end. So I suspect Roots of Pacha has something similar. I mean, eventually the game ends when you stop playing it.
Right. That's one of the things that interested me about Stardew, which was a lot of the conversation around it was about the integration of narrative into like a simulation game, which seemed incongruous and bizarre to me. Yeah, and to hear how they kind of balanced it in that game, which is like there is an endpoint, but you know what? Like if you're here for the farming, keep farming, right? It sounds
this,
like
this I believe is very similar.
Okay.
Because there's clearly a thing I'm leading to, but I also realize that I could probably keep playing after that, right? Yeah, no, I want to say is it is definitely like a wonderful experience for people that like that kind of game, which a lot of people do. You know, it is out. It runs really well. I believe it's out I know it's out on Steam. I don't know if it's on consoles yet. I suspect eventually it will be because why not, right?
Currently, according to the Wikipedia page, which is big enough to have a Wikipedia page, good for them. It's only out on Windows.
It's on Steam, yeah.
Oh, wait, no, hold on. I clicked the show. Windows, Mac OS X, Linux, PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Xbox One, Xbox Series X, and Nintendo Switch.
Right, that's the plan. It's not out on those yet. It's only available on Steam, on multiple platforms Steam, but like eventually they'll have the Switch and everything else. Just like Stardew Valley, right? It originally came to. So
did they do an early access for this as well? I guess that might
there was like a beta for the people that kickstarted it, or you could have kickstarted into a beta or something. I'm actually to the point where I'm very anti early access. I'm not anti. I don't want to be part of that. Like, I just want to get there when you're done with it.
You want to play the complete vision, yeah.
And that's actually a problem. Like another game I kickstarted. They're like, "Oh, we're out on Steam," and I'm like, "Oh, great!" And I install it, and I'm like, "Oh, early access. You're not done. I will come back when you're done." Only because these games change a lot. There's a lot of evolution, and that's just not what I want to be part of.
Right. I think a good example sounds like maybe this. Bloodstained, I think, kind of handled it well. With like they released a lot of game and a lot of games actually. Like with the Curse of the Moon, the 8
right, like the two little 8-bit games.
Yeah, cool. I'm glad you found another game to scratch that itch. There's only so many times you can do the star. That's not true. You can do it as many times as you want.
You really can, yeah. Well, and I think what this one really does well, and I think some reviewers have acknowledged, is that there are a lot of like farming games. There really are. Everyone's kind of getting on that, and they're trying to add their own twist to it. This one, I think, kept the game mechanics feeling similar to Stardew, but really gave it enough differentiation that like this feels, the Stone Age kind of thing was a cool thing, right? It's not just a farm. You're Stone Age tribe, and so I think they did really well. I gotta say, like for what is essentially a studio of two brothers, I think they hit gold with this one.
Yeah, it looks great too. The visual aesthetic is fantastic.
Yeah, and I'm really excited to see, hope to see if they either do more with this or if they, however they go. I liked what they did, and I wish them the best. It's definitely consuming a lot of my time in a positive way, and
you get to finally live out your goal of being a caveman.
Yeah, a Neolithic farmer. Yeah.
You're welcome. Thank you. What was Soda Den?
Soda Den, yeah. Thank you, Soda Den.
Are they? Where are they located? Do you know?
Last I read, it was a split between San Diego and Argentina.
Oh, okay.
That's quite a split. But yeah. Okay, so anyway, that is Roots of Pacha. Like I said, available now on Steam and probably soon later this year on other platforms. A really great Stardew Valley type game that just came out, and that was my week in geek. Dan, what about you?
As hinted at earlier, I've also been playing a video game. I am not through it yet, but I am enjoying every single minute of it. It's a game that actually came out in 2020, but finally released to other consoles or other platforms in 2021, called Call of the Sea. And it's basically an adventure game. It's an adventure. It's a first-person adventure puzzle game that is rooted deeply in like 1930s adventure serials and pulp fiction and Lovecraft. And it's really charming. Speaking what I brought up with Roots of Pacha, like the visual aesthetic of this game is really interesting. which is what got my attention the most, because despite being a professed fan of Lovecraftian fiction, I don't really gravitate towards a lot of it, because a lot of it kind of trades on disgustingness and
tentacles and shit.
Tentacles and blood and melting faces and just general despair. Which I don't really, I mean, that is a part of Lovecraft's fiction, but
it's not all of it.
It's not really. Like, yeah, it's more, it's Lovecraft's fiction, the good parts of it, I would say, without, while acknowledging how there's a lot of bad parts of it. But what makes it work well is that it dives into that sense of existential horror without getting particularly grimy or disgusting, because mostly the protagonists are like aristocratic prudes, right? Mm-hmm. And they're like, oh, I'm touching something disgusting. And this game kind of captures that aspect of it. And the thing is, what I like about it, I like a lot about this game. One, it runs well on my PlayStation 4, my slowly dying system.
Decaying PlayStation.
Yeah, right. It actually fits into the theme of this game. But it does something that I've always kind of been interested in, which is taking cosmic horror and not just exploiting the despair of it, of actually making it fun, in a sense, even making it optimistic. So it's a game created by a company called Out of the Blue, which is based in Madrid. And from what I could tell, it's only their second game. They did a previous puzzle game called, what was it? American Arcadia. I don't know if you've heard of it. I have not.
I have not.
So that's all I'll say about that. And it was published by a company called Raw Fury, who has been making a name for itself as a publisher. They published like the Kingdom games. They also published, to great acclaim, in the last couple of years, a game called Norco, like a sort of old school pixel adventure game. I can't remember. And they also did a game that had some interesting aesthetics called Sable that came out in the last couple of years. They're doing interesting stuff, which is nice to see. And so they've got a pedigree behind them, despite being a fairly small studio that developed the game. But the director of the game, a woman by the name of Tatiana, oh my goodness, I can't even read my notes. Tatiana Delgado. She made an interesting distinction in relation to how it touches on Lovecraftian fiction, where she says, this game is not a descent into madness, it's a rise into sanity. And what I like about it is that they are taking the like Lovecraftian unknowable or unknown mystery of the depths of the ocean or the reaches of the cosmos. But instead of saying like, oh, and it's all coming to rip your skin off, it's more like, what if we're all kind of, well, what if some people are like more connected to that? And the basic plot is you play as a character named Nora Everhart. I think so. Yes, Nora Everhart. And before the game starts, you are married to a man named Harry, and you are both kind of, not aristocratic, but like academics living in Colorado. And Nora comes down with some strange illness where her skin, especially around her hands, start becoming covered in like dark spots, and it's spreading, and she's becoming weak and can't walk and has no energy. And no doctor seems to be able to find some sort what's wrong with her, or furthermore can't find any kind of cure. And Harry seems to believe it has something to do with her family and her history, and he goes off on an expedition to cure his ailing wife. And he disappears. And one day, this is where shortly before where the game starts, Nora gets a package in the mail that just has like a picture of her husband, I think, and but basically it's coordinates to this mysterious island off the coast of Tahiti. And of course, it's an island that when she asks around about it, the locals like, no, we don't go there. We don't go there. Creepy stuff happens there, right? And so the game starts with you as Nora, ailing and weak because of your illness, on this boat on your way to this mysterious island. And the interesting thing is, when you actually arrive on the island, she starts feeling better. And you start interacting with, or you start seeing hints of endemic civilization, long since abandoned, it seems. You start seeing camps left behind by your husband and his expedition team. And that's kind of what the game is, ultimately. There's no combat as far as I've played. It's all puzzles, it's all exploration, and it's all like looking at stuff, which is a nice kind of breath of fresh air. I guess in a way similar, it does for me.
Walking simulator?
Honestly, I think it definitely is pulling a lot from that genre. Like, aesthetically, kind of going back to how I started this, what really drew me to it is it's got a very kind of graphic, posterized kind of look to it, very stylized, which reminds me a lot of a walking simulator that got some note called Firewatch, and plays a lot like that too. I will say there's no real inventory per se, which kind of pushes away from being a classic adventure game as well. But you do have a journal, and you bounce between two sections of your journal. One is like basically whenever you discover a new story point, it records it in your journal, and complete with pictures and stuff. And there's also the basically the clues tab, where if you find a drawing on a wall, she'll draw it down. So you kind of have like your what do you call it? A built-in notebook, so you don't have to take notes on it.
So you don't have to do it. Yeah.
Right. And it works fairly well in terms of the puzzles, which can get a little obtuse, but not
like
so
you
obtuse.
Do in a game like this.
Right, but not so bad. I have at one point gone online, go like, what the fuck is this? What is happening? This doesn't make any sense. I don't know what to do here. And in like looking up guides for it, it was always more like, oh, take one more look at this thing. And I like, oh, okay, I should go back and check this thing out. I've never actually needed to find the answer in a guide. So no, as far as I've seen, no pixel hunting.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, but it's just really fun. It's really well paced, and it's basically broken up into levels, for lack of a better word. They call them chapters, and you have this area that is big but not too big, and it's basically puzzles kind of spread out throughout this entire area, and they're all interconnected. So you find a puzzle and you poke at stuff, and you move dials around. You're like, well, this isn't working. I'll just keep going down this path and see what I see up ahead. And you find a camp, and look, there's a photo on the table, and she starts talking as you look at it. And maybe there's something on the back of it, and like, oh, here's a note someone wrote, the exploration phase. But then on the side of that tent, you see like an electrical box but when you pull that lever, there's no power. You're like, well, shit, I guess I'll keep going. And then once you start exploring the map, you start seeing all the different puzzles, and you start seeing how they're all connected. And it's really satisfying in that regard, because I don't feel like I'm super smart, but I'm like, oh, I like seeing how this large puzzle comprised of smaller puzzles starts to fit together, and you're like, oh, I know what to do next. It's a nice little loop of going from like, I don't know what's around the next corner, to like, I see how this whole thing fits together. Right? All while telling a satisfying sort of Lovecraftian story that, like I said, is not mired in goopy, bloody, disgusting drama. It's definitely steeped in mystery.
Right, and it's actually interesting, because more often than not, Lovecraft things that want to do a Lovecraft inspired story, like you said, focus on the tentacles and the goops and the bloods. So it's interesting to see something that kind of focuses on, the other parts. I mean, like, I always think back to Shadow over Innsmouth, where most of it is just this guy talking about what's going on, but like, there isn't a lot of the monsters are actually few and far between in that story.
Right. There's like like two chase scenes.
Right.
Right.
Whereas most of it is just him, in a suspicious place and whatever. So yeah, it makes sense that there is more to that kind of to that story, or that kind of story.
Yes.
And it sounds like this game is doing that part really well.
Right. I don't want to place all the blame on the Call of Cthulhu tabletop game, but I think that, especially in the video game versions based on that stuff that I've played, it really kind of leans into the cynical, goopy, bloody, scary, creepy horror stuff. and like, the sanity meter stuff,
right? Like everything is Dunwich horror, right?
Right. And
which is fine. That's a type of game.
There's nothing wrong with it, yeah. But it's nice to see other angles on that. I think in my recent viewing, another kind of, I don't know if I would say it's the best or even a good representation of like another angle of Lovecraftian cosmic or cosmicism would be the Wesley Crusher story arc as it plays out in Next Generation, right? Where he kind of ascends into a greater plane of existence.
Wow, this was a twist I wasn't expecting.
Just like a Lovecraft story, my friend.
You had to get the Star Trek into the episode.
Indeed. Oh, thank God. But it is kind of a different angle on those kinds of themes, which is always fun to see. Just for any Lovecraft readers out there, I think there are two stories this game is really drawing from. And I would say almost equally, Call of Cthulhu, in terms of, mysterious island out in the middle of the ocean with, non-Euclidean geometry and cultish type symbols and remnants. And speaking to what you said earlier, Shadow over Innsmouth is a huge inspiration, especially kind of...
So I'm not going to say, when I looked it up on Steam, they had a video, or they had like shots of the game, and there's one of swimming underwater, and I'm like, whoop!
So that's also like, it's weird, because like I say, it's really leading into Shadow over Innsmouth, but it's also, at the same time, it's leading into Call of Cthulhu, and I would also say like the Dream Cycle Lovecraft stories, which I haven't really read because I find those boring. But there are scenes where, for one reason or another, Nora gets knocked unconscious, and you all of a sudden wake up in a very strange scenario. In fact, the game starts in basically a dream-like scenario, but there's always like, is this a dream, or is this the future? Is this the past? And God, one thing this game does really well that I really like to see in good Lovecraftian fiction, especially if they want to engage with like the creatures of Lovecraft, especially like the elder gods and stuff like that, is they really get the sense of scale. And there are some, especially being a first-person game, which I should say, as a first-person game, it's a very slow first-person game in the sense that like you're not doing quick turnarounds. You won't get, car sick playing this game, which I can be pretty sensitive to first-person games. Haven't had that problem at all, which is nice. But there are some scenes where like you wake up on a cliffside and there is stuff you're seeing in front of you, and it looks huge and it looks imposing, and a little bit of the horror kind of comes in, even though it's not a horror game at all. It's more like, whoa, this is crazy. And they have a lot of fun with that, with those dream sequences, for lack of a better word. Again, I haven't finished it, so maybe they aren't dreams after all. Who knows? Either way, it's fun, and it's been a while since I've had a game where like I can't wait to just spend an hour and play some more of this, and puzzle, and pardon the pun, but puzzle over the puzzles, right? To really like figure stuff out and put things together and make things happen, and they do it in such a stylish and earnest way that it's been a blast. It's been an absolute blast, and having it dabble in Lovecraftian stuff just makes it even more fun for people like me, right? So it's a nice contrast to, I think, a game I've talked about before, which does, I think it was a good game, but does dabble more into like the Call of Cthulhu tabletop style of Lovecraftian horror, The Sinking City, which was also played off more as an adventure game, even though there was combat in that. It's just the opposite side of the coin, for lack of a better word. And they're as we were saying, they're both styles of Lovecraftian fiction are fun when done well. This is a breath of fresh air. And it overtly tackles not Lovecraft's racism, but just since it takes place in the 1930s, it tackles issues of racism and inequality, and in a positive and progressive way, which is
that's good. That's good.
Yeah. So, Call of the Sea, another good game. If you want a chill kind of adventure game that looks great and has perhaps giant tentacle monsters. Who knows?
Who knows?
When are they going to add the giant tentacle monsters into Roots of Pacha?
I don't think they're going to. I don't think so. Yeah.
I guess I'm never playing that game.
Well, that's your thing.
Tentacles are bust.
We know what brings Dan to the yard.
Tentacles. So if you, dear listeners, have any thoughts about the topics we discussed this week, feel free to leave your thoughts as comments on the page of this episode at forallintents.net.
You can also post your comments or engage in conversations with other listeners on our Facebook page.
You can find us on other social media as well, specifically at the places where Andrew and I frequent, which means you can find me on Instagram at dbethelcomics, and you can find Andrew on Mastodon at profounddark@dice.camp.
While you're at our website at forallintents.net, you can also take a look at our YouTube page by clicking on the link in the corner that says YouTube. There you'll find this show as it's being simulcast on YouTube. Mm-hmm. If you are there and you're listening to the show on YouTube, please feel free to like and subscribe, or as the kids like to say, ring that bell.
We use 2 tracks of music for our show. One is called Disco Medusae, the other is called District 4. They're both written and performed by Kevin McLeod of the Clan McLeod, immortal swordsman, graph paper enthusiast, and musician extraordinaire.
You can find his music and more at incompetech.filmmusic.io, and that's all licensed under the Creative Commons 4.0 Attribution License.
If you like the show and like to help us out, the best way to do so would be to subscribe to the show using whichever podcasting service you happen to use. What would help us out even more, though, would be to leave some sort of review on their storefront, whether a text review or using their proprietary metric will help spread the word to new potential listeners through the magic of algorithms. Speaking of movies, because that's how we started.
Yes, I saw a movie.
Oh, you saw a movie?
I saw a movie, but it's the end of the episode. I can't start talking about a movie.
Oh my god, I think I know what movie you saw.
Oh, well, maybe next time we'll talk about a movie that we've both seen.
Let's just say, did you have a good day edging the bard?
Yes, Edgin the bard. Which I realized that's how they were going to say it, but I just love that everyone reads it as Edgin the bard. Anyways,
there was a moment in the movie when they first said the name out loud to myself. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, that makes more sense. Well, I'm excited. We should talk about that next week. I like it when we have a plan.
Yeah, and the reason it's just because there's so I saw that movie. We'll talk about it next week. I've got. It's in things we'll talk about and fun times will be had by all. This is an episode where we actually basically just put a next time on for all intents and purposes.
So until you plan ahead, dear listeners, I'm D. Bethel.
And I'm Andrew Asplund.
And for all intents and purposes,
that was a podcast.
You can record if that's your thing, if that's your jam.
I'm recording now.
I realized last week I think the more accurate description is squid panthers, not jellyfish panthers. There's 2 things I know, Andrew.
What?
The first is that Jesus, he knows me, and he knows... No, Jesus, he loves me, and he knows
It'd be really funny if you said, the one thing I know is... You're listening to blah, blah, blah. And then like literally 30 minutes later, you're like, and the second thing is you're cool.
But the second thing I know is you're listening to the Fort.
While you're at our website, you can also,